Okay, so the big talk over the weekend and today, of course, in Washington, that President Trump has made decisions with respect to some individuals who are employed by the National Security Council. Or to say it more bluntly, President Trump has brought about, or his administration has brought about, the removal of numerous individuals who he views, who are members of the National Security Council. Another one was an ambassador, but these people he views as not supporting his agenda, not being part of the carrying forward the new agenda that President Trump has brought into being. One being, of course, one person who was unceremoniously, or maybe ceremoniously, led out of the White House last Friday, this Alex Vindman. So to be really clear who Vindman is, Vindman did testify for the Democrats in the House impeachment hearing. So Vindman testified against President Trump, and, he obviously, he managed to, of course, catch the attention of the president and other people in the White House on the president's team, just saying, this guy is out there. And I want to make clear a few things that you need to understand about Vindman before we talk much more about him. So Vindman is a member of the National Security Council. This is Alex Vindman. He also has a twin brother who is also a member of the National Security Council, lawyer in the ethics division of the National Security Council. The brother has a more difficult name to pronounce. I believe it is Yevgeny. It's Yevgeny, Yevgeny. But these two identical twin brothers, astonishingly, both born in the Ukraine. So they are Ukrainian, from the Ukraine by background, very connected to the high levels of Ukrainian government. And so in this effort to impeach the president, you had these two characters inside the National Security Council taking the side of the Democrats against the president for whom they're supposed to be working. Now, I will say this. I think if you're called as a witness, if you're a witness and you're called before Congress and you raise your right hand, you swear under penalty of perjury to tell the truth, you actually have to tell the truth. That is the way our system works. Can't have a system without that. Having said that, what has come to light about both brothers, the Vindman brothers, is that they were deeply and closely connected with the Ukrainian government. And I want to tell you what I mean by that. Let me do the simple one first. The brother, the twin who was fired, and actually to be clear, they weren't fired from all employment by the federal government. They're just out of the National Security Council and out of the White House. They may have some role, the military finds for them, I don't know, but they won't be in the White House spying on Trump all the time. But the one brother who is a lawyer, Yevgeny Vindman, is the one, his office, which he's in charge of, his office, legal counsel's office of the ethics division of the National Security Council, they're the ones who made the decision, who reviewed the contents of the book that Ambassador Bolton, this tell-all, Ambassador Bolton has written about President Trump and Bolton's service under President Trump. That book, the contents were required to be reviewed. Anyone who is a member of the National Security Council, and Bolton was the National Security Advisor, anyone who writes a book about things they learned during the time of their service on the National Security Council, the book has to go by the lawyer's office, the legal department, the ethics department, figuring out, is anything this person is saying endangering America, endangering secrets, endangering national security? Is anything about it anything that should not be shared? So Bolton, who's writing and apparently was just chomping at the bit to testify in the Senate against President Trump, it was this one brother, Yevgeny Vindman, in charge of that office, who gave the blessing, gave the green light to Bolton to publish this book that was a tell-all anti-Trump book. Okay, so that's one guy, and he's out too. But Alex Vindman, it's really important to understand why President Trump saw him as a traitor. That's my word. Traitor, disloyal, and why it was so important for the president to take action and remove him. And it's going to require a little bit of going into the depth of the story about the Ukraine, but I want to try to do that today with you, at least touch on some pieces of it today. To start with, during the time that Alexander Vindman was working in the National Security Council, and again, closely connected with Ukrainian officials, there was a Republican U.S. Senator, Ron Johnson, a Republican U.S. Senator, Ron Johnson, I think he's from Wisconsin, I always forget what state he's from, but anyway, he wrote a letter at the time, because he attended the inauguration of the Ukrainian president, the current one, Zelensky. So Republican Senator Johnson over in the Ukraine attending the inauguration of Ukrainian President Zelensky, along with some other people. After that time, Senator Ron Johnson sent a letter sharing his concerns that National Security Council official Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman was running a rogue and independent foreign policy toward the Ukraine, expressly against the intents of President Trump, against the intentions of President Trump. Vindman's a holdover, was there in the Obama years, probably liked Obama's foreign policy, liked what President Obama was doing with the Ukrainians. So when Trump comes along, he's president, Vindmans are still there on the National Security Council. And so this is now, to be really clear, this is a U.S. Senator who wrote a letter months ago during the following the inauguration of President Zelensky, and understanding that Zelensky's conversation with Trump is the entire reason we even got to having any impeachment argument. So Ron Johnson writing about Vindman, saying when he was over there in the Ukraine for Zelensky's inauguration that something seemed to miss. He actually went on and on. The letter is quite lengthy. You can read it on our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links. You can read the whole letter. But the point in telling you this is there was concern early on that Vindman was more loyal to the Obama administration, their agenda, their foreign policy plan with the Ukraine than he was interested in following our commander-in-chief. So Vindman was already a problem, but it's important to understand some of the things that went on during the testimony, during the impeachment. Vindman pretty much came around to saying during the impeachment trial that he was kind of signaling to the Ukrainians that he was troubled by. I'm trying to find the. Vindman was testifying in Congress during the impeachment hearing that he was troubled by, didn't really agree with some things that Trump was doing, and that, so he's already signaling, I didn't agree with Trump. Well, obviously he didn't agree with Trump because, he's there testifying, helping the Democrats. There's also widespread suspicion that Vindman was connected with the mysterious, super secret whistleblower. That the whistleblower who didn't hear the conversation between Trump and Zelensky on the phone, wasn't in the room, that it may have been Vindman who gave that information about that phone call that got this super secret whistleblower, who everyone knows who it is, to write the whistleblower complaint that became the springboard for the entire impeachment. I mean, Vindman may have actually been not just disloyal to the agenda of President Trump, but actually part of stirring up the impeachment by sharing information with the guy who wrote the complaint. That is a suspicion. And Vindman acknowledged having talked to other people, as he was not supposed to do, about his concerns that he didn't like President Trump's policy toward the Ukraine. So the idea, first of all, just as a 50,000 feet observation, presidents need a loyal staff. You need a loyal staff on your team, especially when you changed administrations, changed political party in power, changed foreign policy agenda, changed the priorities of America. You have to have a loyal staff. You have to have a loyal National Security Council. You have to have loyal people working for you. You can't be thinking that here we are, we're on America first, and your team is walking out the door and implementing the Obama foreign policy, the Obama priorities, because they kind of liked it better. You have to have loyalty. You're entitled to it. Most presidents, when they take office, actually clean house, just in the way, actually in the private sector, when a new CEO comes into a big company, often some people in the higher ranks of the business are asked to leave, asked to resign. I gotta have my own team. This just happens. So back to this. So President Trump announced today, last week, I guess on Saturday, both Vindman brothers are out. Sondman, who is the ambassador from the U.S. to the European Union, who also testified to help to help the Democrats, to attack Trump, help the Democrats. Sondland was also recalled as ambassador, so he's out. So these three are out, all three having played a very complicit role in helping the Democrats try to remove the president. Vindman in particular, Alexander Vindman, very suspicious. He may have been very early on in concocting the whole dang thing to bring about the impeachment, during which he goes to Congress and tries to tell us all what a really wonderful guy he is, and very ethical and very moral. His lawyers defending him in that way, and honestly, seem to be very much undermining the president. So those things happen, and then so Sondland is out too. And I want to hit something that's kind of okay. I'm very careful about conspiracy theories, because you can read a lot of them. You can read a lot of conspiracy theories. So on the one hand, I'll tell you that every time someone on the conservative side digs up information that makes the left look bad, it's one of the first things the Democrat media mob resorts to, is calling the people who dared to tell that story, who dared to reveal the evidence they've uncovered, who dared to connect some dots and say, hey, this is looking really fishy here. Usually what the left will do is to mock and ridicule and scorn, just heap on scorn, so that the American public will dismiss and not listen to what the whistleblower or what the person who's pulled the dots together is saying. So, on the subject of conspiracies, I'm very careful not to repeat ones that have no basis to them. And I'm very careful when people voice them to think about and reason through, does this make sense? And if there's no evidence other than pure conjecture, I would not share it on this show. I am very dedicated to facts, to truth, but I'm also dedicated to exposing what I see as the danger of the left in America today. So, two things that are maybe arguably being called conspiracy theories. One, pretty strongly developed evidence presented in a special by Glenn Beck. He did a special last weekend, I think. He did a special that I actually it's already available on YouTube, and you can go and watch it yourself. The Glenn Beck special is called Glenn Beck Presents Ukraine, the Final Piece. What he essentially comes up with is this. Glenn Beck is saying that evidence delivered to him, people give him information and then he investigates, and then he said in the special, he shared information with members of Congress, asked them to verify, does this sound right? Could this be? What Glenn Beck is saying is that the reason there was so much concern about the Ukraine and so much angst about President Trump urging the Ukrainians to look into the corruption of Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and Burisma, all that in 2016, was because many people in the American left were concerned that the Obama administration, during the time when he was still president, Obama was president, was sending money over to the Ukraine. In fact, the money was earmarked for assistance to avoid bank failures in the Ukraine or something like that. It was allegedly, your tax dollars, our tax dollars, assistance sent to the Ukraine to help them prevent bank failures, but the money disappeared. No idea what happened to it. Large amounts of money. I didn't write it down, so I'm not going to, but large amounts of money. And that money apparently ended up in the hands of one of the oligarchs over there, who apparently used it to fund the Ukrainians' military defense against the Russians. So his theory is Obama's sending money to the Ukrainians, and he's got, to be really clear, Glenn Beck is not just sitting here talking like I'm doing. He's got documents, he's got lists, he's got a timeline, he has data he does know is true. And I'm sharing this with you to say that the reaction of the American left to a phone call between President Trump and the Ukrainian government was so out of proportion, so extreme, so hysterical, so outlandish. I mean, to build an impeachment case against the president over a call to say, hey, you ought to be looking into this, Biden, Burisma, money laundering operation that, by the way, the Ukrainians didn't complete because Biden threatened the Ukrainians that if you don't fire the prosecutor looking into this case, we're going to withhold $1 billion in aid. All of that is known, what I just said, all that's known, and the Democrat reaction to President Trump talking to Zelensky of the Ukraine and saying, hey, this looks, this was in July of 2019, this conversation happened between Trump and Zelensky, and the entire Washington establishment went wild, like this was the most, and it was nothing wrong with the call. But the left went wild. So part of what Glenn Beck is saying is, for all the documents he's been able to see and the timeline he creates and things you can prove by the documents, the U.S. sent a bunch of money to the Ukraine to allegedly help failing banks. It ended up in the pocket of one of the big oligarchs who owns the biggest bank over there called Privat Bank, and that same oligarch was the founder, or at least one of the key figures in Burisma. So the same guy, oligarch, getting the money, according to Glenn Beck's theory, spending the money on military aid, on fighting the war against the Russians. So it's like we're in a proxy war, which is was not a war declared by our Congress, not permissible. And what Beck is saying, in part, is it may be the American left was so hysterical about this completely innocent call between Trump and Zelensky, because that whole can of worms is likely to be opened up if the Ukrainians and the Americans continue investigating all of what went on under the Obama era between America and the Ukraine. That is, I say the term conspiracy theory, and I say that just because what I'm laying out for you, Glenn Beck is sure enough of to have done a special and put it out there. And for all the reasons people do or do not like Glenn Beck, he is known for astonishing research and detail and persistence and laying things out in a way the common Joe can follow. So that's the first conspiracy theory. Second one, and I'm going to retract that. I want to take that out of conspiracy theory. It's a very reasonable suspicion that something was very amiss in the relationship between the Obama administration in America and the Ukrainian administration during the time Obama was president. And a lot of people in Washington do not want to be talking about that. And this guy, this oligarch who, a principal in Burisma, owner of Privat Bank, funder of the proxy war with the Russians, is a guy, very, very scary criminal guy. So, other theory I want to mention that is just going on, the kind of the backdrop of all of this related to the Ukraine is this. The one article of impeachment, there was one article that was just about obstruction of Congress because Trump wouldn't drop his executive privilege and just give the Democrats everything they wanted. That was one article. But the other article that I'm focusing on right now, the other article it was called abuse of power. Now, I agree with those who say neither of those impeachment articles meets the constitutional standard for impeachment. But leaving that aside, the Democrats were saying that President Trump abused his power by urging the Ukrainians to look into Biden because that constituted interference with an upcoming election in America. Because in America, Biden, in the middle of this Burisma, Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, money laundering, corrupt beyond description, ongoing adventure with the Ukrainians, Joe Biden's right in the middle of it. And the only reason that the Democrats could even come up with a reason to go after President Trump on this Ukrainian deal was because Joe Biden is a candidate at this time. I mean, if Joe Biden were not running for president, then President Trump's call with Zelensky of the Ukraine, urging him and the Ukrainians to look into Burisma and Hunter and Joe Biden and the whole thing, all of that would not have been obstructing, would not have been in any way unfairly, it would not have been an abuse of power. It would have nothing to do with the 2020 elections. It was only abuse of power under the Democrats' theory because Biden is a candidate for president. Now, I'm about to say does tiptoe into the realm of conspiracy theory, but there are some people connecting a few dots pointing out that Biden, meaning Joe, and Hunter Biden, they both know what was happening inside the Ukraine. They both know about Burisma and all the money that came flooding into the bank accounts of Hunter Biden and people affiliated with Burisma. They know about the money laundering. They know about all that. So, the question by some conspiracy people, and I tell you folks, I debated about this again and again. I'm just going to lay it out there. I am not going to assert it as fact, but I'm going to say the pieces being put together make sense. So it's in the realm of possible. Maybe Joe Biden got into this presidential race for the purpose of making him, A, in the view of the media, untouchable. I mean, you know, in this whole impeachment process, whenever anyone talks about, well, how can you be talking about impeaching President Trump over doing what Joe Biden did and admitted on air in front of, thousands of people? The answer is, you can't do that. That's done and over. You can't talk about it. You can't, you're attacking a candidate. So it's kind of like they made him, or Biden made himself, untouchable. The Democrat entire caucus in the Senate and the House were saying nobody can even talk about Hunter and Joe Biden and the Ukraine because he's a candidate. Any kind of attack on him, given that he's a candidate, makes you guilty of interfering with the election, makes you guilty of that. So, but on top of that, when you think about the corruption was within the Ukraine and Burisma and all of that, and the oligarchs, and you have the Vindman brothers on the National Security Council, and you have Vindman, Alex, allegedly being the one that set up the whistleblower complaint, the super secret, mysterious, unknown, everyone knows who it is, whistleblower. You have him allegedly setting up that whistleblower, him, Vindman, finding a basis to get a complaint about Trump's conversation with the Ukrainians, running to the Vindman's, aware of this, taking it to the whistleblower, who then launches the entire impeachment launched on what this whistleblower said. And all of this, Trump's words would not even have approached an argument of abuse of power, except that Joe Biden is a presidential candidate. If he were not a candidate, if he were private, former Vice President Biden, there would be no basis for the Democrats to have claimed that Trump abused his power. So the question is, did Joe Biden make a decision to get into this race after he realized there's a lot of looking around inside the Ukraine as to what happened with the Burisma and the oligarch? And I'm not saying his name because one of those names, every time I try to say it, I don't say it correctly. I will get it for you. But the oligarch in the middle of all of this, oligarch who owns Privat Bank, who is a key figure in Burisma, who allegedly got the money from Obama to conduct the proxy war against the Russians. That guy, just a creepy, scary level guy. So the question is, did Biden get into the presidential race as a big-time ultimate setup of President Trump? Because once Biden's in, anything President Trump does to urge the Ukrainians to look into this, to figure out what happened, constitutes, or could be arguably constitute, abuse of power. And that second theory, I'm going to tell you, folks, I don't know about that. I'm not going to posit to you. I'm sure that's right. But I will say people connecting these dots are wondering more and more why Biden even got in. He's not doing well in the race, and he's not very together mentally. But was his getting in the race actually a step along the way of setting up President Trump? I don't know, and maybe we'll never know. But it's an interesting theory. It certainly dovetails with the Vindmans, who are being right in the middle of it, being Ukrainian allies, very, very much wanting to protect the same people in the Ukraine that President Obama was dealing with. That's who the Vindmans allies are in the Ukraine, is the ones President Obama connected with. One last thing on the White House cleaning house. So they did, as we have been talking about, they did remove National Security Council, Alexander Vindman, and also his brother, Yevgeny Vindman, was a lawyer there, recalled Ambassador Sondland. There's news out today that the Trump administration has announced they're going to remove 70 more members of the National Security Council. They're still trying to dig in and find out who that, anonymous was, who ran the big article in the Washington Post, the New York Times, claiming essentially that they were, they're an insider in the Trump administration. They're going to keep on staying. They're going to keep on digging, and they're going to dig up everything bad about Trump and all that, all the stuff that the anonymous said. There's still an effort inside the Trump administration to figure out who that guy is, and some hope, I think, among the 70 they're going to remove from the National Security Council. Maybe they'll get that anonymous guy out there. One last thing on the National Security Council, it really mushroomed or ballooned up in size under the presidency of Barack Obama. And so part of what the Trump administration is saying is, we can bring this council back to a reasonable size, and we don't have to have that many people in, but they're also removing numerous people whose loyalties seem to be closer to President Obama than to President Trump, which is clearly the prerogative of the president.